Baby steps.
This is Infants on Thrones.
I'm looking for the further light and knowledge Father promised to send me.
Baby steps. Baby steps.
Look for the good in everyone.
All right, this is an experiment for Notebook LM. I want to explore this idea: the wise man built his house upon the rock, the foolish man built his house upon the sand.
The wise man built his house upon the rock. The wise man built his house upon the rock.
And when the rains came and the floods came in, the house on the rock stood still, but the house on the sand washed away. So this is a old, ancient, I don't know how ancient, I don't know how old, but it's a folk tradition. It's been passed along from person to person, generation to generation. I'm sure there's variations of this. But what does it mean? What is the rock? What does it mean to be wise? And what's the sand? And what does it mean to be foolish? I think if we make these assumptions that the rock, the way that I was taught it, being raised as a Mormon, was that the rock was the gospel of Jesus Christ as interpreted by Mormon leaders.
Follow the prophet, follow the prophet.
So basically it's Mormon doctrine is the rock. Mormon doctrine itself being a kind of interesting thing to try to identify what is doctrine and what's not doctrine. But it's the idea, if you're obedient, you follow the prophet, and you do what your leaders tell you, that's building your house on a rock. And I felt like I did that. Got married in the temple, paid tithing, attended church every week, obeyed the word of wisdom, did all the things that I was supposed to do. But when the winds came and the floods came in the form of like arguments and disagreements and an inability to have really good conflict resolution, the marriage fell apart after 17 years, 3 kids. And so it felt more like the foolish man who built his house upon the sand. And what's the sand then? Would be, at least the way that I was taught it, was the sand is the way that the world teaches you to do things, teaches you to be. Maybe that's materialism or being false as a way to try to impress other people, being like a con man, being manipulative, being, like not being honest. Those kinds of things are being sand.
My teacher told me I should never tell a lie, because a lie will bring you trouble sure as far.
But I didn't build my house on those things, did I? At least I didn't think so. So now I'm left looking back at my life. And then, of course, I had another marriage after that lasted for 6 years. And there were 2 stepdaughters involved with that. And that one ended. And I thought that I was building that one on a solid rock foundation. But, it turns out every foundation that I build on is my own foundation. It's my own internal nervous system. It's my set of neurons, the colony of neurons that live inside of me are the foundation upon which I build everything in my life. And is that a solid foundation or is it a sandy foundation? What is the foundation of these neurons, these colony of neurons that I do? I would say that it's a solid foundation because of evolution, because of the way that my body finds homeostasis kind of all by itself, the way that my brain runs things. It's a pretty solid foundation that I'm built upon. So what then is the sandy foundation? I'd say that the sandy foundation has to do with my perception, the way that I interpret things, the stories that I tell, the way that I really feel, the way that my thoughts influence my reality. Things that tools like cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, mindfulness, these therapeutic tools can help me understand the sandiness of my own internal thought processes, what my colony of neurons, at least the portion of it that's dedicated to my egoic waking self, what that is doing. So it makes me wonder and question about this whole wise man built his house upon the rock, foolish man built his house upon the sand thing, and how if I interpret it from a certain way, like the way that the church wanted me to, in how I was originally taught this idea, it means one thing. But if I were taught another way, if I was taught that actually I'm always building on a firm foundation because that's what my biology gives me, I just inherit that. In this culture that we live in, it's pretty stable. It's going through a lot of changes right now, for sure, a lot of tumultuousness, tossing and turning. The waves are coming and the floods are rising, and a lot of people are feeling that they're built out of sand. But what if that's a perception thing? What if changing perception could make it easier to deal with these floods and rains and storms, if that's really what they are, if that's really what they're doing? There's this idea that came to me a couple of years ago. There's a power within you. There's a power within you, and you're using it right now. You cannot help but use it now. It is the power of transformation. The words you speak, the words you hear, you transform them into something that seems so real. Waves of light, ripples of sound, you transform them in your heart, in your mind. You transform them into something that feels so real. What is real? It is your creation. The power to transform is what you are. And this idea came to me a couple of years ago, and I wonder how it applies to the wise man who built his house upon the rock, or the wise man who built his house upon the sand, because this rock foundation that my whole biology is built upon is about transformation. It transforms all kinds of things. I'm transforming oxygen into carbon dioxide all the time without even thinking about it. I'm a transformer. I transform the words that people speak into meaning that says they're this or they're that, or I'm this or I'm that. And sometimes that gets tied into these ideas of worthiness, personal worth. What am I worth? So maybe the wise man building his house upon a rock would be accepting reality as it is, as a transforming reality, things that change. There are storms that come in, and there's destruction that comes with it, and then there's new birth and regrowth that comes through it. And when I'm the person that's experiencing that, whether it's through failed marriages, failed relationships, issues with my job, career, or just feelings of self-worth, maybe that's part of this tumultuous process that is life. And I was taught that if I just live in certain ways and do the right thing, quote unquote right thing, then everything will be okay. And then if things aren't okay, then I must have done something wrong, and maybe I'm not worthy. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe that's not really what's going on. So I'm going to use this as an episode for Infants on Thrones, because why not? I like to record my personal thoughts and reflections from time to time and publish them as a podcast on Infants on Thrones. And I'm really interested to see what Notebook LM will do with this conversation. And I'll share that with anybody who's interested. And these things I say in the name of the wise man who built himself upon reality, the wise man who recognized himself to be built from reality, and attempting to become more at one with that reality. Amen.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. So today we're diving into some listener thoughts on, honestly, a pretty classic metaphor, that whole idea of the wise man building his house on rock and the foolish one on sand. But the material you sent over, it kind of asks, what if it's not so simple?
It's like those parables always sound straightforward, right? But then you start thinking about them in your own life. And
it gets real, right?
Exactly.
The source material here starts as a straight-up personal reflection. They're talking about this parable, but through like a religious lens. So the rock is, strict adherence to doctrine. Well, but then they get really honest, and it's kind of heartbreaking, actually. They talk about how their marriage fell apart, even though they felt like they did build on that rock.
Makes you wonder, doesn't it? when what we think is our solid ground.
Maybe it isn't so solid after all. Right. And they don't stop there either. They go on to explore this idea that maybe the true rock, it's already within us. Like, what if the rock is our biology, our very being?
That's a fascinating shift. Instead of something outside of us, it's about our own resilience, our capacity to adapt to change, almost like we ourselves are made of rock in a way.
So then what's the sand in that scenario? Because, you got to have sand, right?
And they suggest it's our perception, all the thoughts, the interpretations, the stories we tell ourselves, all that stuff going on in our heads.
Oh, I know, yeah.
That's where it gets really insightful, I think. It's not some external force messing us up. It's our own inner world. Cognitive biases, limiting beliefs, that negative self-talk loop that becomes the sand that makes us vulnerable.
I'm remembering how they talked about CBT and mindfulness too, and I feel like that's where it clicked for me. It's like saying, hey, you can actually learn to reshape the sand you're building on. Do you work with that kind of stuff?
All the time.
Yeah.
Not just professionally, but personally too. It's incredibly empowering, honestly. It's not about pretending the challenges aren't there. It's about building the internal strength to handle them, which actually, that leads perfectly into their next point.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
They talk about how we are all inherently transformers.
Transformers?
Yeah, we take in information, we have experiences,
yeah,
and we quite literally transform them within ourselves. It's biological.
Whoa, okay. I'm definitely intrigued.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it. It reminds me of this time I was trying to figure out a career change, and it felt impossible.
Oh, tell me about it. Career changes. It's like trying to jump onto a moving train, right?
Exactly. And you're right there in it, having to adapt, figure things out on the fly.
Yeah.
It really brings this whole inherently transformative thing to life.
It makes you think about self-worth too, right? They actually connected this transforming idea to how we value ourselves. It's not about getting to this point where you're like, okay, I'm worthy now. It's about recognizing that power to transform as the valuable thing in itself. That's a big one.
It really is. It's not about those external achievements,
Yeah.
It's about seeing the power we have to grow, to evolve.
Yeah.
And to go through some tough stuff and come out the other side.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
It's like that saying, what doesn't kill you?
Makes you stronger.
Right. But it feels like more than just being stronger, doesn't it? It's about seeing the value in going through the transformation itself.
Absolutely. It's realizing we're worthy just by being here, being on this journey of growth and transformation. That's the point.
Okay, so bringing it back to the parable, building on rock. It's not about following some rule book perfectly. It's more about building that inner resilience, right? Being adaptable, ready for whatever life throws at you. What do you think?
I think that's a huge part of it, definitely.
Yeah.
It's acknowledging that, sometimes things feel shaky, internally, I mean. And that's fine.
Because let's be real, life's always changing. We're constantly in this flow of growing, changing, whether we're aware of it or not,
And when you embrace that constant movement, that's freedom right there. You can let go of needing to control everything, and suddenly you're curious about what's next, even if it's unknown.
And maybe a little laughter helps too, yeah, because sometimes you just gotta laugh at how wild it all is.
100%. Got to have some humor in there, especially with something as, multi-layered as finding your own meaning in it all. So where does that leave us? What do we do with all of this?
Right. If we're always changing, always kind of rebuilding our house as we go, what are some things people can actually do to make sure that foundation is strong? I know they mentioned some specific ideas.
They did. Remember those therapeutic tools they talked about, CBT, mindfulness, that kind of stuff.
Oh, right. Yeah. But give me a refresher. How do those fit in with everything else we've been talking about?
Yeah, they're not just like trendy terms or whatever. They actually give you ways to look at those thought patterns, those beliefs that might be holding you back.
Okay, so what's the difference, really? Because in their letter, it did feel kind of similar, mindfulness and CBT.
They do kind of flow together for sure. But think of it like this. Mindfulness is like the base. It's about being present, noticing your thoughts and your feelings, but without judging them. Imagine those negative thoughts are clouds just passing through. You see them, they're there, but you don't have to grab on and let them carry you away.
So instead of getting sucked into that whole doubt spiral, you're just observing it. That's got to be harder than it sounds, right?
Oh, it definitely takes practice, for sure. And that's where CBT comes in. It's like you get actual tools to work with, to challenge those thoughts that aren't actually helpful. Like say you mess something up at work, and that voice pops up. going, see, you're not good enough.
Ugh, the worst, right?
The worst. But with CBT, you'd be like, hold on a second. Is that even true? What evidence do I have for that?
It's like you're putting those thoughts on trial or something.
Exactly. You're cross-examining your own negativity. And when you do that, you start to open up space for a more, I don't know, realistic and kind way of seeing things.
I love that. So mindfulness is like creating that space, and then CBT gives you the tools to be like, nope, not today, and negativity. It's like a 1-2 punch for that sand we were talking about.
You got it. And the more you practice those tools, the more you build up that inner rock, that solid foundation. Storms come, but you can weather them.
You know, it's funny, thinking back to the source material, they talked about how self-worth ties into this whole transformation process. Like, the more we learn to work with our inner world, the better we feel about ourselves, just as we are. It's not about becoming perfect. It's about being on the journey, you know?
Yeah, it's freeing, right? No more pressure to be this perfect person. We can just be ourselves, figuring it out as we go.
And maybe that's the real secret to building a strong house, right? It's not about some external checklist. It's about that internal resilience, that willingness to keep learning, even when it's hard.
It's about that deep trust that even when things are shaky, even when those storms hit, we have what it takes to handle it, and we come out stronger on the other side.
I don't know about you, but I'm feeling pretty inspired. Time to go build some houses.
With some seriously strong foundations. This has been a great conversation.
It really has. And for everyone listening, remember, it's a journey, not a finish line. So embrace that process of changing and growing. Build that resilience and build your house on that solid ground of self-awareness and a whole lot of compassion. That's all we've got for today's deep dive. But until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those big questions, and keep on building.
Thank you for listening to Infants on Thrones.